Welcome, everyone. Tonight we have a very special celebration of the Declaration of Independence. But tonight is about more than just celebrating the Declaration. It's also about asking if Americans today can do what the founders did. Can we come together and reason together across our differences? Can we identify fundamental principles that we share in common? And can we commit ourselves to the cause of liberty today and in the future? We are a collective effort here of the Institute for Liberal Values, 1776 Forward. Both of these organizations are also member organizations of the Free Society Coalition, and that's what we are celebrating tonight. The work of the Free Society Coalition, specifically the Philadelphia Declaration and the Happy Birthday Freedom brochure that the organization has created. And our goal here tonight really is to model the civil discourse that these documents continue to inspire. So I'd like to take a moment just to have everyone who's here take a moment to introduce themselves, just tell us all your name, the organization perhaps that you're here to represent, where in the United States you are from, because beautifully, I think here we have a beautiful representation of across the country. And also, if you brought a special beverage to celebrate tonight, you can share that with us as well. So I'm Joia. I'm one of the co-founders of 1776 Forward. My co-founder, Chris, and I, we normally even do the Free Speech Forward podcast that has been an ongoing collaboration all this year between our organization, 1776 Forward, the Institute for Liberal Values, and the Free Society Coalition. We had the opportunity to interview many of the panelists who are here tonight. So if you haven't checked out our Free Speech Forward podcast, definitely take a moment and find some of these as well. I am calling in tonight from New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And my drink of choice tonight is sparkling water, but in a fancy beverage glass here. So I will turn it over to my co-host, co-founder Chris, and we'll go around the room here.
Excellent. Thank you, Joy. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are really excited about tonight. And just to echo what Joy has said, we really see this as the capstone event of the last year's long collaboration between our three organizations. And also, like Joya said, we really envision this as helping bring alive the declaration that originally brought all three of our organizations together, and then even model the brochure and other content that you guys have since gone on to create to celebrate this amazing 250th milestone, the semi-quincentennial, which is a mouthful that I'm still working on pronouncing correctly. But I am Chris Bush. I'm the co-founder with Joia of 1776 Forward, and I am calling in from Miami, Florida. And maybe not coincidentally, I love my good Miami Vice, but I don't have one of those slushy makers at home. So instead, I'm getting flavored rum drink with a little bit of passion fruit puree. So that's my drink tonight. And I guess I'll introduce Larry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Lawrence Reed. Please call me Larry. I'm with the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE. It's headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm speaking to you tonight from my home in nearby Noonan, Georgia, about an hour southwest of Atlanta.
And Craig, would you like to go?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Craig Kreinbihl calling in from Maine, actually, tonight. And I have my own firm, the Onward Strategic Advisors, and the privilege with that firm of working with the Free Society Coalition in the capacity right now as managing director. I've been involved with that work since about the beginning of this year. Unfortunately, was not able to participate in the original conference, but it sounds very inspiring, and I've been able to pick up quite a bit since then. So I look forward to that conversation tonight among the folks who were at that conference. And I'm a little bit boring tonight. I just have fancy water here, but cheers.
We each have our own different flavors. That's totally great. We thank you for bringing that. Felisa, how about yourself? Oh, I think you're muted.
I was just asking David just to hold on a second. Hi, I'm Felisa. I am up in New Hampshire. So, Craig, you should have told me that you were going to be in my region. of New England. I am a part of the Free Society Coalition team, along with Craig, and I also own Common Ground Campus. Created it with my co-founder Brent, who you guys will talk to in a little bit, and then also the president of our Bridge Charities that supports a lot of the events that we do for Common Ground Campus. And my beverage of choice is A&W root beer.
Great. And Felisa, I believe you have David Kelley as well. Do you want to give him the mic for a moment?
Good.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm David Kelley. I'm a philosopher and writer by profession, philosopher and writer. And I founded the Atlas Society, that's now the Atlas Society, in 1990, and along with two other people, Jay LePere and John Aguilar, I was one of the founders of the Free Society Coalition. So I've been active on multiple fronts, and I'm glad to be part of this discussion. And since it's not a rigor to say this, and over the yardarm, I'm drinking white wine.
Excellent choice. Thank you for joining us, David. Dan.
Sure.
Hey, I'm Dan. Represent the Miller Effect Project, which is our little nonprofit where we provide mentoring to young adults from Pittsburgh, PA.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Brent.
I would definitely say last and least. I think that works perfectly. Brent Hamachek. And first of all, where I'm from is Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, up on the Canadian border. Where I live is the Chicago suburbs, so condolences in order for me. And I was part of the original group because of my involvement in working with Felisa in the Common Ground Campus program she started, and then Bridge Charities, the foundation that was started to support its efforts. So that's me, and I am drinking Fresca, which I read on the internet was the favorite soft drink of Ayn Rand. I don't know if it's true, but I read it on the internet, so it must be.
It must be true.
Must be
Excellent.
True.
Wonderful. Well, so let's get started then. Let's kick this off with a toast. Let's toast to freedom, responsibility, and the ongoing work of this American experiment. And I'm so glad that we're all here tonight for this conversation.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So this event is called Founding a New Freedom Consensus, learning the process from the founders. And you guys obviously started this, this movement through the Philadelphia Declaration, but a lot of our audience probably isn't familiar with the Free Society Coalition. So Larry, would you mind just explaining what is the Free Society Coalition and why was this milestone of America's 250th birthday such an important occasion for you to kick off this initiative?
Okay, I'd be happy to, Chris. I think credit for what is now the Free Society Coalition. We didn't have a name at our first meeting, but we subsequently arrived at that one. Credit for the idea goes to, I think, three people: David Kelley, who's with us tonight, and two business people, Jay LePere from New Orleans and John Aguilar from Philadelphia. I hope I haven't left anyone out, but I think those three guys really got it off the ground. We met, about 60 of us, in Philadelphia in April of 2024, a little over 2 years ago. And I'm sure that everybody who attended that meeting knew that we were not of one mind on many of the hot button issues of the day. But we also knew that we were united on some pretty important big picture stuff. And principally, that would be the importance of individual liberty, the importance of celebrating America's 250th, which at that point was just 2 years away. And so we thought, can we put aside whatever differences we may have, philosophical or on particular issues, and come together around the notion of encouraging the American people to understand better the upstream ideas that gave rise to the Declaration of Independence. So many Americans, I think, if you asked them, tell me about the Declaration, they would focus on that day in July in 1776 when the document was issued. But we think it's important for Americans to contemplate the dialogue among the people who became our founders for months and months, even years before 1776, because the Declaration didn't just pop up out of nowhere. I mean, it was prompted in part by what the British were doing to the colonies, but also there was a great awakening of ideas in the colonies that would lead directly to some of the most moving phrases in human history that made their appearance in the Declaration of Independence. So, and then, of course, knowing that the semi-quincentennial was just around the corner, we thought, well, maybe we should come up with our own document that accomplishes our purpose of getting people to think about the ideas upstream from the Declaration. Produce our own brochure or pamphlet with that document in it, and then host events or participate in events where we could explain to people that the ideas behind the Declaration are what we should be focused on, not just the fireworks, but the ideas behind the Declaration.
Excellent. And I think you hinted at it in your response there, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and then maybe hear from David as well about what was the specific problem that you guys thought you were trying to solve or that was really motivating you to do this around, I guess, kick off this initiative, if you will. If there was kind of a single problem that you had identified that kind of motivated you, and then what made consensus possible among the 60 people, as you mentioned, that you gathered together who presumably did not agree on most things?
Well, I think all of us who were at that first meeting in Philadelphia, you could say we were all ideas people, influencers in one way or another, writers, authors, teachers, people who appreciate the role of ideas and recognize that ideas are really what make the world go round. And I think many of us felt that so close to the semi-quincentennial, there didn't seem yet to be enough focus on the critical ideas that went into America's founding. So, we knew that we had differences when it came to say whether we were people of faith or not of faith, or where we stood on immigration or any number of other hot button issues. But we were all united and remain so on the importance of getting Americans to consider why and how the founding of this country is so exceptional in the history of the world. Hopefully they'll come away from these discussions appreciating the individual and the importance of individual liberty from all these various discussions that we've helped to promote.
Excellent. And Felisa, do you have David?
Yeah, David would like to offer something. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just Larry covered most of the ground as usual, but I wanted to say we have a document that we produced after that meeting called the Philadelphia Declaration for Freedom and Responsibility, and it's in the brochure that I hope everyone has access to, the Happy Birthday Freedom brochure. And what we did was to try not just to say, the revolution in 1776 was yes, a revolution, a political revolution, but it had a moral basis. And we tried to articulate what the moral basis was upstream from the politics. And so I was the lead author of this, although maybe I think everyone contributed. I've said before, as a writer, I've rarely gone through as many drafts for great input by others. So anyway, in essence, what we've said was that there's reality, and that has to be our anchor. that we are able to grasp reality by reason, whatever other faculties we may or may not have, such as faith or whatever. And then that we are both individual and social beings. That is, we're individuals. Only individuals think, only individuals act, only individuals have beliefs and values. But we're social animals. And so putting that together with individualism, it means to me we want a society of voluntary exchange, voluntary relationships between people, win-win, not win-lose, as coercive exchanges are. And that it depends ultimately on values and individuals and practice, including the responsibility, agency, and the belief that we are all equal before the law. There are no privileged classes, and that the government's role is simply to protect our rights and otherwise get out of the way. And that was a radical thing in 1776, because every prior society, most of them, some of them had concepts of rights. They all tended to see government as a central player and individuals as subservient to government. Our founders said, no, it's the other way around. The government is a servant of the people, just there to protect their rights and otherwise, as I'd say, get out of the way. Mm-hmm. Laissez-faire. So that's what I think we were, and this is a view that many of us still hold today, but not everyone. And we're facing movements to bring back controls, subordination, and government authority, both on the left and the right. And we are opposed to both. So that's my take.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So I know not everybody on the call here today was able to be part of that original process of the Philadelphia Declaration, but all of us have now signed on to this project. So I would love if we could just take a moment to go around and let everybody have an opportunity to take just a minute and share briefly why you personally signed on to this project and what it is that the Free Society Coalition is doing. Brent, you went last, and so the last shall be first. You may go first this time.
It's almost biblical, my presence here. How wonderful. Well, look, in terms of originally joining, that was easy. It was an outreach from David Kelley to myself because the idea had been come up with to do this, and David recalled the work that Felisa and I are involved in. Which involves, the Common Ground Campus program is entirely about trying to bring young people together and sort of work through differences and so on. There's more to it, but in essence. And so when he heard about the idea that they had to bring groups together, he reached out to us to be included because it's sort of our raison d'etre, right? And so being a part of it in Philadelphia was great. There were no expectations about what was going to happen when I got there. My thought was we've got all these different groups around the country that seem to love individual liberty. They all had 7 out of 10 things in common, and they all spent a lot of time focusing on the 3. And so this was an opportunity to find a way to focus on the 7. And so the conference itself, the meetings were useful, came out of it with the idea to write that declaration. And what I'll say about the declaration and the process that my far superior but fellow author friend David Kelley went through, my takeaway from it was in learning the difference in the using the indefinite and definite article, and that is it wasn't about finding a right word to use; it was about finding the right word to use, and I mean every single word. And David worked through many iterations and lots of meetings and lots of folks trying to figure out how many angels to put on the head of a pin, and ultimately came up with a document that found the right word to express virtually everything the group had in mind. So those are some thoughts that I had about participating, and then observations about David's writing along the way and in the process he went through that we all tortured him with.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we will definitely come back to this idea of finding the right words and what actually made it into the Philadelphia Declaration. But next, I'd even like to turn it over to Felisa, because I know you were one of the people who was also there from the very beginning. If you'd just like to share what it was that drew you to this project.
You're on mute, Felisa.
All right. I was just, David, can you still hear?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, yeah. So if we go back to the beginning, actually, David is the only one that's on this call that was actually there from the beginning. When we were brought in was after they had already spent months putting it together. And I'm not sure that we had a goal other than that it was called an Enlightenment Conference. And we wanted to bring together a huge group of people that had varied beliefs and secular background, expertise. Almost everyone in there is an accomplished author or speaker. And we're really talking about a serious challenge. By the end of a very long weekend, I think it was 3 days, we still didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew that we wanted to do something. And so we had gathered these charts together and set off on our way. And so David is really being gracious in his description. This continued where we met in 4 or 5 different groups online in separate sessions once a month for, I think it was like 4 or 5 more months. And every time that happened, every time a group met, David was on the call, David was taking notes, and David was trying to figure out how we could help balance all of our priorities amongst our little groups. And then he would whittle it down and we would tear it to pieces in our different groups. And then he would take all of that information. And after 11 different iterations, everyone said, you know what? Yeah, that's pretty good. I think that's good enough.
We're still iterating.
It was really an incredible process. And to go through that, it's not to say that every single person that started out from the beginning, some thought it was a great idea and never showed up. Some people showed up, they participated for the whole weekend, and then they didn't really want to participate in the whole way. So it was really representative of the way for me, and this is, kind of my personal thing, that we were actually emulating exactly what happened just across the street from where we started at the Union League in Philadelphia, what had happened, and that it was quickly approaching, at that time, it was only a year and a half, 2 years away for America's 250th. And it didn't, like Larry said, didn't really seem like people were focusing on that. And at the time, there was a movement, they were talking about the fluid constitution. Now, to me, that's very, very alarming words. This was one of the topics of discussion. And also there was the Great Barrington Statement. And so a lot of people were kind of saying, well, maybe we need to make a statement, not a declaration at that time, a statement like the Great Barrington Declaration or Statement. And, the problem with that is that we're not a bunch of, medical expertise. We are expertise in our own freedom and our own agency. So although it was an extremely ambitious project, I don't think we realized just how ambitious it was. And for those who stayed in, that was really, really an incredible and meaningful project, to which we had, a bit of a reunion just last month in Philadelphia, inviting all of them and then all of our new board members and, and other people who were interested in coming and teaming up with Jack Miller Foundation. And that was also really, really incredible because we got to then reflect backwards on all that we had learned. And it's such an honor for me to be able to be a part of the process. It has grown exponentially. We didn't even have a logo a year and a half ago. So through that process, logo, name, what we're going to call ourselves, What on earth was our purpose? We had this document. Could it just lift from the pages, or was it going to require work? All of that good stuff in order to share it out. So much like our founding fathers, they declared our freedom in that moment, but that doesn't mean that it was won yet. They then had to go out and they had to recruit people in the taverns and the churches, convince them to leave their farms, come join our craziness. This is worth fighting for because here it is on a piece of paper. And maybe that didn't mean anything to them, but because those people stood up, those few people, and I think, the way that the story is told and glamorized in Hollywood, the people just don't understand that it wasn't a majority that stood up. It was very few brave people that stood up for all of our, ancestors and for all of what at the time was 13 little teeny tiny colonies that, covered the state that Craig's in now, my own state, New Hampshire, and, down to Virginia. That covers right now the, Europe. And we have Europeans coming here, for the World Cup, and they're going crazy because they can't believe the freedoms and all of the things that we have. They're cheering because even in their young, or not young, but they have a high population of youth. So a lot of the people that are here are younger. Their experience, even compared to ours today, they said, this is the greatest country in the world, and everything that they're seeing is so great. And I think was the purpose for us coming together 2 years ago. Was we want to bring that feeling back. We want to bring as if, we're experiencing it for the first time. And I do think that we're well on the way.
Thank you for sharing that, Felisa. Larry, I'd like to turn it over to you as somebody else who was there at the beginning. Is there anything else briefly you'd like to share about what it was at the beginning there?
Well, in my life, I can't remember a time, excuse me, when I wasn't in some way involved in advancing liberty, way back at least to junior high school. So that's like 60 years. In one way or another, it has been my passion, to the point where I think I'm otherwise unemployable. And it's important to recognize that when you consider all the billions of people who have lived on this planet, 8 billion now, who knows how many more in times past, a single digit percentage of them all could be said to have lived in any situation of considerable liberty. Most were slaves or serfs, or they were living in constant fear of a handful of people who held concentrated political power. Well, when the American Revolution began, a year before the Declaration was issued, that was like a thunderclap. It was our founding generation telling the world, we're going to change things. As Thomas Paine said, we have it in our power to make the world over again. That's pretty exciting stuff. We wanted to change that monotonous story of people living in some form of serfdom under the thrall of some bunch of thugs with power. That's, to me, there is no other political issue more exciting than how to advance liberty. So when I was approached to be a part of this, I didn't have to think twice. Of course, I said yes.
Thank you for sharing that. Craig, I'd love to hear from you next, because I think of all of us, you're perhaps the most recent person to come onto this project. So I'd love to hear even some of your motivations for joining the Free Society Coalition.
I think we still want to grab Dan, though, too, because Dan
is next, too. Yep.
I got to go.
Good to see you, Larry. Thanks. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I feel a little bit jealous that I wasn't involved at the very beginning, hearing all those descriptions, and it's really it's been a wonderful effort, and blessed to be involved with it now. So really for me, it's all about the responsibility piece. The liberty is so important, but I think we're now at that stage where, okay, what do we do with that liberty that we have? And there's such a obligation that we have, not only to ourselves, but to our children, to the future generations, to advance that liberty that's been entrusted to us. And, the founders themselves knew that this was only going to be a republic if we could keep it. And my world, my passion, if you will, has mostly been in the education space. And what really appealed to me about the Free Society Coalition is that this is about educating. Ideas are at the root of what we do, and you can't get closer to education than that. And so it's just been a real privilege to kind of see the evolution of the organization, even since I've joined, to be a part of that, and then now to carry that forward in terms of educating and the responsibility that we have to Liberty to educate. I was recently in Philadelphia at the reunion that we had with many of the original folks who signed on to the Philadelphia Declaration, and that was a wonderful experience for me to get a better taste and flavor for the ethos, behind this organization and what really makes people passionate about these ideas. So it's been a great learning experience for me.
Thank you. And Dan, I definitely did not forget about you. I did even want to save you for last here because I think you really have a unique perspective, being someone who, as you do, boots on the ground with our young people to maybe share why you came onto this project and how you hopefully see it influencing the future Americans that will carry on this torch for liberty.
Yeah, so I came onto the project because I've been, for the last 20 years, I've been a pastor and an objectivist. And so I've had two voices in my head, which have been Ayn Rand and Jesus. And um, David Kelley's like, what? But actually, it was because of David's book, Unrugged Individualism, that led me to reach out to him and just say, hey, I'm a pastor. I'm really interested in objectivism. I kind of think of what would it be like to have an objectivist chaplain around young people. And he said, let's have some conversations. So back at the end of 2023, we had a series of conversations, and I think he was intrigued by me and perplexed, which I am every day when I look in the mirror. And he said, hey, we're doing a conference that, or we're trying to put something together that you would be perfect at, because it's trying to bring together these two irreconcilable ways of thinking about the world to try and reconcile them and find a way forward. And so, yeah, in some ways, even though I wasn't invited because I was the head of an organization or something like that, it was a wonderful place to be because the two voices were out there fighting with each other and getting along with each other too. And so what popped out was just this beautiful statement of, again, like David says, the basis is reality, right? And it's about the formation of the individual in a way that corresponds to reality. And no matter what voice is speaking in my head in the time, whether it's Rand or whether it's Jesus, I just find the Declaration refreshing. It's clear. It's modern. Yeah, and I think it's the kind of document that I worked with a Turning Point chapter at the University of Pittsburgh for a number of years, and there were all kinds of students in there, religious and non-religious, and different religions too. And that document could have been so great for that group of people. I tried to introduce some of them to it, but it's longer. It takes longer than 10 seconds to read. So sometimes for young people that can be a deterrent. But I just think it's a brilliant piece of writing that needs to be circulated more widely, and I think it can provide a point of unity for people who otherwise think they might not have anything to do with each other.
Great. Thank you all. So the subtitle of tonight's event even is Learning from the Founders Process to found this new freedom consensus. And we certainly want to highlight how it really was that ability to bridge divides and find consensus among people with differing backgrounds and ideas that marked the moment back then, and then what you all have accomplished 250 years later. So I'd like to maybe just reflect on that past association, past and present, to hear anyone's thoughts on kind of one, what do we think how much did the founders really differ from each other at the time? For anyone who maybe is steeped in the history and has a good sense of that. And what should modern Americans learn from how they bridge those differences? Because we'll talk in a second then about how that process may have been similar for you all in drafting your declaration.
I think it would be great to hear from David first, if he could, to kick us off on that, the group's scholar.
Sure. David, do you want to start off in that question?
Sure. Yeah, we when the when the three of us, myself, John Aguilar, and Jay LePere, are current chairman of the Atlas Society and of Cato, by the way. When we first met 2.5 years ago, we thought, listen, the 250th is coming. I can't say the whole word. Larry stood on that, but I'm not. So, but the 250th, we said that's coming along. It's 2 years out. It was 2 years out at that point, but it's a benchmark and it's a ratification. There's likely to be a lot of hoopla about it, a lot of discussion, as has turned out to be the case. And we wanted to be in that and focus not just on the fireworks and the 4th of July festivities, but on the meaning of it, especially the moral meaning. Lots of people were talking about the politics. We wanted to discuss the background, the moral premises that led the founders to their view of government and their revolt against Great Britain. So we did, and we had a number of conversations. I think we definitely took an inspiration from the founders in that, first of all, substantively, their ideas were ours. We felt we were hoping to carry through the ideas that Jefferson and Madison and George Washington held and promoted and inspired them to start a new country, but also to update them in the face of, as I was saying before, a move toward greater government control, sometimes from the right, sometimes from the left, but government control that seemed to us incompatible with the original ideas of this country. And so we had our differences for sure. There were people of religious faiths and people of secular, like myself, atheists. But that we'll put that aside because many people of coming from different ultimate philosophical and belief origins nevertheless recognize that American values are special and need preserving. So, and I'm an epistemologist, a logician, so I'll put it in those terms. Ethics and politics are influenced by your basic view of the world, but they're also influenced by your inductive observations of what works and what doesn't, and your observations about history. And many, many people who are religious, unlike myself, share that same commitment to American values, the founding values, what I call the Enlightenment or modernist values of individualism, productivity, responsibility, fairness, and down the line. So that's what our message was, what our agenda was, to recruit people who share that belief, and I think we did pretty well. I want to say though that although I was a primary author of the Declaration, the Philadelphia Declaration, David LePere, who I'm sorry couldn't be here tonight, has been carrying the ball in terms of implementing this, making connections, advancing on many, many fronts. And since he can't be here, maybe Craig, at some point you could tell us what are the main activities currently to, get our ideas out there in the public, exclusive ideas. But meanwhile, there were differences, but we hammer them out, like the founders, I think.
Thank you. And I wonder if anyone would like to maybe comment on or shed some light, pull back the curtain a little bit on what maybe one or two of the key differences were as you were drafting this discussion. But, how it didn't break the coalition, or maybe it did. Felisa, I think you had mentioned some people didn't stay through the whole process. So was there one or two hot button items that were harder to reach consensus around, and then how did you navigate through that?
Well, I'll jump in if it's okay.
Yeah.
In particular, one that came up both at our group tables initially before we even knew we were doing a Philadelphia Declaration during the original meeting, and then during the process was David mentioned the idea of people with religious beliefs and atheists, or we could use, Felisa brought up the term secularists. Whatever it might be, one of the things that was clear is that the groups involved that had religious persuasion were quite careful about trying to focus too much on this being just about individuals, being very sensitive to the notion of responsibility to mankind. And while nobody was suggesting from the non-religious side that mankind ought to be burned down for the sake of the individual, the individual really was preeminent. And so a lot of detailed conversation, and that was where searching for the best word as opposed to a best word really came into play. David ultimately threaded the needle with that. But it was an interesting conversation to be a part of, insofar as you would just think, well, look, everybody loves individuals and we all want individuals to be free. Seems pretty basic. But when you start to take it from that and you try to put it into paper that will last forever and be read by others, you know that they'll interpret it. And what you saw very clearly was there was a real need not to let people interpret too much, to be precise with what we were in fact saying. I think ultimately that needle was threaded, but that was one of the things that certainly came into play, at least, from my perspective.
Would anyone else have any?
Dan, I think I think Dan was really integral. At least one of my tables, it started our relationship in talking about that individualism and the church, and just kind of helping to soften that. Dan, do you want to kind of share some of the advice or the philosophy that you were sharing, and how both are possible?
I don't know what I said. I mean, we've talked about a lot of
You had
things.
so many conversations.
I just think, I don't know, from a Christian perspective, one of the classic scenes in the Gospels is Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Right, and they say, some say this and some say that, and then he asks one of the disciples in particular, "Who do you say that I am?" I think it's just one example of the emphasis how on in the Bible there is this communal element, but at the end of the day, I like the kind of Kierkegaardian stance that it's you who stands on your own 2 feet before God. Now, if you're not a religious person, you could just say, well, it's you that stands on your own 2 feet before reality, right? It matters what you think, what you say, how you act, and everything's going to come from that. Every effect on society is going to come from how each individual acts and thinks. So I just don't see, when the rubber meets the road, we could disagree about where everything's coming from or where it came from or what's above it or what's below it. But when the rubber meets the road, it's all about the formation of the individual. Everything comes back to how is the individual going to think and act in the world. And so I think that became, for me, it became one of the linchpins of the document and why I could so heartily say yes to it, because I don't know how you disagree with it.
Well said, Dan.
Well, and I know, Felisa, you've often talked, even in our offline conversations, I think positively about how you had such diverse religious views amongst the participants and how that itself mirrored the experience of the founders. We often forget that a big driver of those who first came to America was to escape religious persecution and find the freedom of conscience and belief to worship as they saw fit. So, I guess just any other reflections on that aspect and how you got. It sounds like that by agreeing on some of those foundational principles that David mentioned, which frankly don't really touch upon kind of religious doctrine per se, that may have been one of the mechanisms by which you found that consensus.
Yeah. I think another touchstone was agency. I believe we spent more than a full day, everyone arguing over what the definition of agency was. Brent made a comment about balancing an angel on a head of a pin. And that was, really words mattered. And we took great care. But that's not to say that we weren't able to, through that great care, through that commitment to having conversations, that we weren't able to then say, aha. So there is something that we do agree on without, having to define the definition. And if there were things that we did disagree on, we tried to really get down into the word and the definition and its meaning to each of us, as Dan was indicating. And what could we agree on? And did we need to also state that in the declaration? And so it was really a diverse set of people, as an example, that came together and said, okay, can we find overlap? There was no compromise. People didn't walk in and say, okay, I'm going to, allow myself to be converted. Although I will say that our opening dinner, I particularly remember a rabbi there. And then on the first day, there was a lot of people trying to kind of convert the other and get them to come over on the other side. Objectivists, talking with Christians and saying, yeah, but if you just think of it this way, eventually it faded. And I think that that's probably very similar to what our founders went through. And that was, realizing that people, they're really anchored in what they believe. And they have a right to believe that. However, we have all of these overlapping principles now to practice from. And at the time they didn't. So isn't what we did very much an exercise in, okay, we can agree here. Can you imagine if we didn't at least have that agreement, how difficult it would be and how amazing that is that they came from straight up tyranny off the boat, they came here for some independence, and then the king tried to take it away from them. And that's when they were like, you know what? That felt really good. I didn't know exactly what freedom felt like, but we want it back. And that's when they declared, hey, we're going to take our purse back. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really, it was really an honoring experience. It was a channeling experience for me. I'm not sure that we went into it thinking that, but we definitely, by the time we were creating the brochures and stuff, and, aiming it into America's 250, we were absolutely determined, in the overlap. And, that's why I call it a modern day consensus document. I'm not even sure if it has, a name, but it lives as an example that it can be done.
Right. Well, and as David mentioned, a big motivator for behind this project, right, was the sense that in our own times, freedom is under attack and under threat. So in a way, we've all benefited from understanding what enough freedom feels like. And this is a new way to remind Americans, don't let it go, right? Let's stand up and fight for it. I'm just curious then, any of David, Brent, or even Craig, kind of what this experience has taught you or you think draws out about civil disagreement.
Do you have any comments, David?
No, I one memory from when I when I was a philosophy professor at Vassar College, I taught logic and epistemology, my specialties, but I also taught political philosophy. And I tried to be neutral among different ideologies, but when we got to classical liberalism, I just asked the students, would you like it if I told you who you should date or marry? And everyone said, oh, no, get out of my face. And I said, so I was trying to tap into an instinctive feeling that, no, my life is my own.
Yeah.
And I will live it the way I choose, responsibly, but my own. And so that is, I think, one of the essential things that we were promoting was your life is your own, live it as you choose, but respect the rights of others.
Yeah. So they can also live.
Exactly. And I think, did I understand you were asking, John, you were asking Craig that, I'm sorry, Chris, that you were asking Craig to catch us up on what has happened since?
Well, I just was asking any of the panelists to reflect upon what this experience, both the drafting and the original drafting and all of your work since, what it has taught anybody about just civil disagreement and how to do it civilly, which I think is a huge theme of what Americans could all benefit more from today.
From where I said, I mean, I think what we
great background. So I have nothing to add to that.
Thank you, David. Yeah, from where I sit, I think what we've realized is it's hard. You know, we are not accustomed as Americans to having this kind of civil conversation, even, you know, around the familiar family table. You know, there's oftentimes political fighting and other kinds of trying to score political points and quick win shots. So what we want people to do is slow down, bring it back to the ideas. And when you focus on the ideas and you find that commonality and really share your passion but engage with the text, you learn so much more yourself from that process, but also you learn from others if you're willing to listen. And I've, excuse me, I've seen that in play with some of the model seminars that we've done. We just had a seminar in May with some students that we brought in Philadelphia. Dan was one of our moderators for that, and the student reactions were very positive to going through this exercise. And what's surprising is they're saying, "I've never done anything like this before. You know, I've learned way more using these kind of careful principles of engaging with the text, having deep conversation, probing questions than I've ever experienced in my traditional school classes." And so this has informed a lot of our path forward, which of course we would like to touch on at some point during this conversation. You know, it's kind of what's next for Free Society Coalition in terms of our education model, and how to engage others and reach others and kind of influence the way we want to and we need to. But the civil discourse experience, I think, one, we realize as Americans that we're not talking to each other, we're not listening, and that's got to stop if we want to keep our democracy.
Yes, and I think that makes a wonderful transition to exactly where we want to go to next, which is coming to the present day now and coming to this wonderful Happy Birthday Freedom brochure that the FSC has created that includes the Philadelphia Declaration and builds upon it with, I think, just excellent probing questions that can hopefully inspire people to engage in civil discourse. And what we were hoping could even happen now is for those of us who've been part of this organization from its early stages to start to model exactly what this looks like. To your point, Craig, that unfortunately, this mode of conversation is not very common anymore in America. And I think we can even start by toasting to bringing back this idea of more first principles conversations about freedom and the meaning of America. So cheers and here's to
I'll
that.
drink to that. Yes.
And it was even the founders' practice. I do believe that they drank coffee when they needed to be energized, that they drank alcohol when they needed to relax, that they drank water when they needed to hydrate, that beverages can help get the conversation going. So hopefully that's what we can do here. And where I'd love to take this next is for any of you to propose any of your favorite questions from the brochure and have us start to have a dialogue about them and show people what it's like to have a conversation on these important questions.
And that includes your humble panelists as well as part of that conversation.
Well, dead air is always bad in media, so I'll break the dead air while others think. I just want to, instead of giving a favorite question, I just want to share a thought for your audience about questions in general. And, you know, the work, I am not the same human being that I was 6 years ago, not 2 years ago, 6 years ago. And that is because of the work that Felisa has allowed me to join her in. I was as partisan as you could possibly be. And I no longer have a partisan bone left in my body. And I no longer tell people anymore what I think about much of anything, but I'm deathly serious about wanting to find out what they think. And the key to asking questions of others, it's not about asking the question. It is actually about, forgive me, giving a damn about the answer they give. And I just finished working on a book today that involved having to go back over material on communication that I was teaching literally 10 years ago. And looking at that very idea right there in front of me from old notes, that you have to actually care about the answer you're given. And so I would urge everyone in your audience that whatever the questions are, whether they come from our manual or whether they come from somewhere just in your daily life and heart, when you ask those questions, don't try to guess the answer of the person that you're asking. Don't try to think about what you're going to ask them next while they're answering. Just please listen, and then ask the next question as it relates to the answer to the first. And you'll find that your conversation and connections and communication will improve tenfold. And thanks to my colleague on the screen, I was teaching that stuff 10 years ago, but it turns out I wasn't doing a very good job of it. But in working with Felisa in the Common Ground Campus program and working with young people, there is a discipline that got instilled in me to do better. And so that's the way I do better.
Brent, just to jump in there, you don't need me to reinforce that point, but I think that's a crucial point, because when you do that, you don't just say that you believe that people are individuals. You treat that person like an individual, unrepeatable, sacred, special, important. And if you don't start there, you're almost cutting your legs off at the knees, right? If you're not going to treat someone like an individual, then what's the point in talking about individualism?
Agreed.
Felisa, would you like to add anything here? Just since Brent mentioned you as someone who's learned so much from about how we can have these kinds of conversations that really do listen to each other and bring out the ideas and the answers from everyone.
Yeah, it's funny. Brent was mentioning a book. We have been writing our own, and we have a lot to say about that. First of all, it's really, really tough. I think, getting students to be involved in something outside of their normal stream is very, very tough. For Free Society Coalition, we have decided the best path for us is working with the educators, because the educators, they already have those relationships. They have a trust that's built. Dan, I'm sure he would support this. It takes a while to develop that trust. The educators know in their classroom, if Susie's going to take a break in 5 minutes, and if she's always going to be pulling out her phone, if, she's looking across the room at Danny because she's got a crush on Danny, and Danny just heard her yesterday, she's going to know how to speak to those students in her classroom. So if we're aiming our efforts really at supporting the teachers, and can we, give them incentives and then let them disseminate the way that they do so well in their own classroom? Is it going to be most effective? For what Brent and I do working on campus, we do student directed things, events. We do, border cleanups and community projects and coffee house, midnight penny societies and bridging the divide events. All the key words are every single thing in our project is called Bridge. And our book is even called The Bridge Within. The point is that it is about the stream that already exists in our society. We're not going to be able to change culture unless we join it. And I think so that's part of the problem, is that people are in denial. Young people today are terribly depressed. We are scaring them away. We are, ruling them to death. And, to the point that teachers don't even know what they can teach anymore because they can't keep up with whether or not they're supposed to have a kitty litter box in the room or not. And that is very, very challenging culture. And so the best thing we can do is, one, support our educators, and two, meet the kids where they are. And if you can give them some green space, which is what we're entirely about, and that is new space for them to go, that is completely chill with, the help of the educators. Maybe the educators even get to come with, and maybe they leave the institution for an hour on a Saturday and go meet those kids there. Because those relationships, those connections are the most important thing. If you talk to any, veteran coaches that teach anything about PTSD, it's, connection. If you talk to, elderly people that are in a home and they're in, counseling, or the nurses, that are taking care of them, they miss the connections. You can't take the money. You can only exercise your freedom if you have people to share it with. So if we are isolating everyone and we're dividing everyone up, eventually, you're no longer going to have an audience. So is that what you want? Do you want to be, like hooked up to a machine like the Matrix and talking to yourself? Because that's where we're headed if we don't come together in a way that genuinely connects. That's not unity. That is family. That is nurture. That is so much more than one can just express in a book or write on a brochure. But I think that is the essence that we're trying to capture right now, at least working with the educators and anyone else who's interested. So for the viewers of your show, reach out to us. We want to connect. Joy and Chris, you guys have been so integral. You are the only one of our collaborators who has consistently kept your promise. Every single month you have interviewed someone and you've made it all about Free Society. You've made it all about what we're doing. And I just want to thank you, because that's not what you're all about. But yet you found a way to come into our stream. And I think that, we at Free Society and the rest of the world, we need to take your initiative and say, you know what? We need to do what they're doing.
Thank you for that. It's our pleasure, and we signed on because we were equally inspired just hearing all of your stories about what brought all of you together from this diverse coalition. That certainly was what galvanized us. So we've been it's been a mutually advantaged win-win trade for sure, our collaboration. And just to give a little more context around here, I'll kind of step in for this brochure, bringing it alive section, and modeling the question, just to give some context for our readers or listeners who aren't familiar. So Free Society Coalition produced this brochure, and they used the declaration as a springboard to ask probing questions, Socratic questions, if you've heard that phrase. It's really just asking kind of fundamental questions about the nature of ideas, the meaning of ideas, to spark a conversation. And so what they've done in this section in the brochure is they've taken some of the key passages in the Declaration of Independence and then drafted their own follow-on questions, and with the hope that that will spur others, all Americans who pick up this document, to explore those questions themselves with their friends and family, etc. So, in that spirit, there was one that I thought I might ask David, in particular, since he has highlighted that he wanted to, that a big focus was of drafting this document, forming this organization, was to assert the moral foundation of freedom. So, one of the key phrases in the Declaration of Independence, perhaps the key phrase, although that's certainly a debatable one that I'm sure everyone on this panel has a different view on, is that we are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So, and one of the questions that FSC came up with then is, what are rights and where do they come from? Who has them? Why? What do we mean by unalienable? Really unpacking that phrase. And I personally, even through my own work in philosophy and politics, have reflected on this question a lot. I think rights is a bridge, to use your phrase, Felisa, to morality. So I'm curious, David, if you might, in your own words, answer that question, kind of what that phrase means to you, and maybe even help draw out this idea of rights, because I think actually there's a lot of confusion around it in our modern age that underlies a lot of the conflict about what our government is supposed to do.
Sure, I've tried to be brief. There's a lot to say on that question. But the fundamental mark of a free society is that individuals are regarded as possessing rights that not even the government can supersede.
Right.
Rights have a deeper basis than political edicts. Now, maybe they come from a creator, if you believe in a creator. Maybe they come from nature, if human nature, I believe the latter. But the point is, the reason that resonated with the founders and resonates with many of us today, is that rights, we make choices, we live, and our values are individual. And if we can't act on the basis of our own judgment and choices, then we're hamsters. We're just running around in a cage that's run by the government. Government has, but we have to be careful when talking about rights, because we mean the fundamental so-called negative rights of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. The negative, so-called in political policy anyway, because they don't impose positive obligations on others. Only the negative obligation not to deny us those rights, not to interfere coercively and prevent us from living, choosing, and owning what we're entitled to. So, rights. The point is, rights have a basis in human nature, not in government per se. Now, government has also promulgated a lot of so-called rights to welfare, rights to housing, rights to equality of employment, and so forth, that do impose obligations to employment, that someone has an obligation to employment. And that is not a right. That is that has to be worked out between the people involved, the person hiring and the person looking for work. If you try to force that, then you are creating a coercive society in which people can only do what government allows, and that's not the idea.
Right.
Government can only do what our Constitution allows. That's the point. Government is a servant of the people, not the other way around. So, whether you think that rights are God-given, that, as the Declaration says, and I'm fine as a time, but I think if you explore what that meant, and Larry can elaborate on this later, I think what they meant was that they're very in human nature. If you believe that our human nature was created by the Creator, God, fine. If not, fine too. what matters is that we are rational beings who have the capacity to choose and understand and think, and that's the way we should free to act on that basis. So I don't know if that answers your question,
Yes.
but hopefully.
No,
Well said.
thank you. That was excellently said. And I think even that distinction of the negative rights versus kind of anything that imposes obligations on others, particularly by an authority like the government, that's very clarifying. So thank you for that. And yeah, just for all of our listeners out there, check out the FSC brochure, Happy Birthday Freedom, that section. It actually gives a great overview of many other such questions, Socratic-like questions like this, that you can use as a guidebook, even really, to go back, study the Declaration of Independence as a foundational document, and ask yourselves these questions, explore the meaning in your own mind and words of what those immortal phrases meant.
I'd like to share too. I learned from Peter Boghossian, another wonderful philosopher and scholar on the Socratic method. Just a wonderful, it's 5 steps. You hold it in the tips of your fingers of what the Socratic method is all about. So as he points out, it always starts in wonder, which I think is a beautiful way of how we sort of open ourselves up to curiosity and questioning. So it starts with the questions. Then from the question, you come up with a hypothesis. So this is perhaps what David modeled for us, the idea that gets put on the table. The next step is the pushback, the elenchus, I believe, as they call it in official philosophical circles. But it really is, I think, the heart of what the Socratic process is all about. When we actually have this conversation, when we have different voices come in and push back and say, well, yes, but what about this? And you didn't say this, and I disagree with that. That really is the meat of this process. Then I think next, very significantly, what always comes with the Socratic process is a point of decision making, a point where we decide, did we actually hatch this out and can we reach a decision? And then most importantly, the last, fifth and final step is the action step, that our conversation is not just going to be hot air, but something we will actually make a decision on and act upon. So I guess I would open up to everyone here. Is there anything in what David said here that anyone would like to push back on? And if not, if you would decide that what he said was correct, an action that you might take that would reflect this agreement that we've come to.
Well, I don't know that I would push back, but I would make an interesting, or I think it's interesting, suggestion to your audience, and that is, if you want to have a little bit of fun, go back and look at the Constitution for the old Soviet Union. And what you will find is that in terms of rights for people, it's really quite remarkable how similar it is to ours, except in that case, it is the government giving the rights to people. Of course, they never honored it, by the way, that's an aside, but they did give them on paper all those rights. Whereas opposed to in our Constitution, we started with rights and then made limits on what government could do with regard to them. And it really is a fun exercise to go and take a look at that old document. And and again, whether one believes they come from God or nature, whether they're Aquinas's laws or whether it's Locke's, it doesn't matter. The point is, we're really saying that there's something inherent about these things, wherever you think that they come from, and getting people to understand that, and then what that means is pretty critical, because we've lost. It's all drifted over 200 and plus years of history, and people really sitting down and having some serious conversations about what that really means. We don't spend enough time with the word inalienable. Literally, it means you can't get rid of these. You're stuck with them. They're like a birthmark, So these inalienable rights are ingrained in us, and we're stuck with them. So what are we going to do with them? I think spending more time just with that word and making people understand the implication of it would be useful.
Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
Well, I think to Brent's point, we've taken these for granted so long that we have a whole generation that doesn't even consider rights now, and doesn't consider that these rights don't come from the government, that they predate the government. And because we don't even have these conversations, we're not getting any closer to understanding these ideas. And so the point of now, engaging in this conversation, being serious about this, bringing this into the education system is such critical work. And it's very much, by and large, foreign work to what we're seeing in most education environments right now. And so when we do introduce it, and when these students are exposed to really thinking seriously about, wow, the significance of this document, not only significance of the document in terms of the ideas, but the significance in terms of what this means for them as individuals, and that personal reflection upon it. That's very moving, and that inspires the action. And I think the action is to continue to want to learn, to continue to want to participate in the civic process, and share this with others.
Thank you. Yes, we had a conversation recently with someone who noted, actually from an educational background even, that knowledge of, much less interaction with the founding documents, is not universal in today's education system in America. So we applaud. Part of why we even love what you're doing and wanted to spotlight it here on the eve of our 250th is because you are drawing attention to these founding documents. And it sounds like, even from your own experiences, that just even that act gets young people in particular engaged or re-engaged with these ideas in new and compelling ways. And, I just, as a follow-on, Craig, I might ask, from your experience, do you find that interacting with these founding documents and just even getting exposed, if it is for the first time for many of these young people, to these ideas, is that sufficient, you think, to reach across to people who may have a different view on what the government should be, who maybe think it should be doing more to help people and provide housing, healthcare, and all these other things? Or, are there other tactics, perhaps in your experience, that you've seen that can be used to bridge that divide if people do have kind of differing views from certainly those of us on this call?
I think there are certainly other tactics, but I think we have to go back to the basics right now, because we're so far from getting there. It's so far from being able to even have these conversations and consider the ideas. And so that's really our focus, is that we want to bring people back to the fundamentals, and then use that as a building block for them to then build upon, right? And so get that strong foundation, and the political considerations and everything else can then be better addressed after you engage seriously with the ideas. And we have our work cut out for us just in engaging with those ideas. So that's really our lane that we're focused on. And we've seen great success there. We've also learned a lot, engaging with educators on what does and does not work in the classroom. And so we're providing many more structured approaches and tools for educators to use. So we're developing a curriculum. For example, we have a 2-day curriculum on our course that we'll be rolling out here soon. All of these resources, by the way, will be posted to our website, and that's the Free Society Coalition.org. And you can also have a direct link to our brochure through that website, or directly at fscbrochure.com, where you can download our brochure, engage in our brochure, and then we'll have other resources that are posted there as well. And one of those key resources will be this curricular guide, which will help educators take their students through the process. But also, we realize educators are not being taught how to engage in this kind of Socratic conversation, discussion, structured conversation, I should say. And so we're providing those educators with a tool to do so, and also modeling best practices for them so they can deploy them in the classroom.
Excellent. So let's turn briefly, as we approach our ending, from celebration into action. So we are only weeks away from that 250th milestone. So I'd love to just hear from each of you briefly, what is, if there's one thing that comes out of your efforts over these last 2 years to draw attention to the Declaration, either the original and or your new Philadelphia Declaration and everything since, that you want Americans to take away from it, or just even an impact that you hope this will have on the people that you have reached by July 4th, 2026, what would it be in each of your own words?
Go ahead, David.
Just briefly, I've been very focused on the preparation for this 4th of July, and haven't thought as much about what comes after. But what comes after should include the continuing promotion of our declaration and of the questions, because those questions are eternal, and they are they're not tied to a timeline. They spark some discussions, and that's why we're using the occasion to do that. But hopefully we'll be able to continue promoting these ideas going forward as long as it takes. Thanks.
Thank you. Felisa, would you like to follow on?
Yeah, I would love to see educators feel that if they take up this torch, if they feel the need, that they won't be ostracized by their peers, that they have the strength and the fortitude, that many of those that, fought the revolution, that began, in just a few days on July 4th, 1776, that they have that same courage, and that they take it back out, and say, yeah, but no, this is why we're celebrating. And this was just the start of something incredible that you today can forget about, and it still exists whether you know it or not. But the fact is that it was earned in blood, and that it was earned in hard work, and that it is still effective today, and that the Free Society Coalition proved it when we built the Philadelphia Declaration, and we used all of, whether we knew it or not, whether it was intentional or not, it was not lost on me. I definitely noticed along the way, I think everyone else did too, that something really important was happening here, that we were channeling something, that it can be done. Now we're bringing it to life. We're putting it in a brochure. The brochure is going to evolve over time. We're building more tools, but they're all for our heroes. And those heroes today are our brave educators that are going to say, no more cat boxes. It is time for us to say, listen, this is a house of learning. This isn't a house of feelings. And here's where we need to start with that. Your preferences may not be put on me. You can keep your preferences and do whatever you want to in the sphere of liberty. But you cannot, do certain things. Don't burn down the bridges and don't burn down my buildings. And I think that, they need a tremendous amount of support. So to any educator out there that's listening, thank you.
Great, thank you. And Brent?
Oh, well, let's see, what do I think? Well, Felisa knows I'm not necessarily all that excited about the whole 250th birthday thing necessarily, because I think, that's an interesting milestone. It's a big number, but I'm much more forward looking. And to me, it's always about next. And she's good to work with because she keeps me interested and enthused in the 250th piece. But I think that from a Free Society Coalition perspective, it really ought to be about pushing forward with the declaration that we came up with, because that is forward looking. And it is something about where we can try to get people to agree on some fundamental principles and move forward today. I would argue that the Declaration of Independence in and of itself, it's an interesting document. It's important historically. It's got a beautiful preamble, but it's a legal complaint against Parliament and the King. And fun exercise for your audience, if they're interested, go through and read the list of items in the grievance and read them in the context of saying, how many of those things, if I change the specific words, but I look at the principles of them. How many of those grievances might we still have today? And when you read it that way, you will find that we have a great many of those grievances, but they're no longer held against someone across the pond. They're held more against things in Washington and in state legislatures. And so that means there's work to do. There's still grievances to be addressed. And I think that starting by agreeing on the things that we drafted as a group is a pretty good way to do it. If you argue that the founding fathers started by agreeing what was then their preamble, well, then consider our document to be a preamble. A preamble to what? Well, we haven't drafted out the list of complaints, but I certainly would like to see it emphasized more and used more for the purpose of battling going forward. Final thought very quickly. You could argue that the Declaration of Independence compared to the Constitution was actually no big deal. The reason I say that is that people were being oppressed. They thought they weren't being treated fairly. They said, we're really mad and we're going to do something about it. End of. And then they did, right? Then they fought. Pretty easy to get people to agree on being treated badly. Much harder to get people to agree on how they're going to be treated going forward. And that's what the Constitution piece was about, right? So that was the heavy lift. The Declaration on some level, beautifully written, but it was a statement of anger. And we've had enough. You know, we could hear the people singing the songs of angry men. But then the hard part came. So hopefully, you know, in another, 11, 12 years, we can get together and do this again, and we'll have something constitutionally related. But those are the ramblings of an old man.
I hope we do come together. Yes, it's our turn. I wanted to bring my personal biggest reason for why I care about the future of this country. You're going to say, Happy birthday, America.
Happy birthday,
Happy
America.
birthday, America.
Yes, happy birthday, America. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as
I'm
this
almost done birthday.
Love it.
And Craig, just if you want to, I'll let you answer as well, and then maybe even just help close by telling us what we can expect from FSC going forward past July 4th, into July 5th.
Absolutely, and many years to come. So it's really all about that responsibility piece. You know, Brent, I think one of the reasons why the Philadelphia Declaration is such an amazing document is because it carries this torch forward, and it says, you know, what is our obligation today? What can we agree upon today? And a lot of what we're trying to do in the classroom now is getting down to the students' level and saying, how can I make this something that's meaningful to me, so that I care about these principles, these ideals, and want to take action civically with my country to better this land that I call home, and these ideas that have such meaningful impact. And we believe that they're very powerful when people are exposed to those ideas, that they're going to revolutionize their lives in a positive way, and it will create a freer and better society. And it's just an honor to be involved with this work and see the little wins that we do have and the big wins to come as well. I would say I think our work is very much just getting started. You know, there was a lot of legwork that was put into this effort over, 2 years time period. And I think what we will see in the coming months and years is that the momentum will continue to really, really gain traction. And that's what we want. We want this to, catch on fire. And so what your audience can do is, and what you can expect from us is additional resources. The hub for that will be our website. We also have a newsletter that you can sign up for that's a periodic update on our work. That's the Free Society Coalition Dispatch, where we share more on civil discourse. We share more on educational parts from the Declaration, partner updates. Our partners are so strong and so important to what we do. We are a coalition. And again, really appreciate your role in that as a partner organization. And we want to continue to build out that network and elevate the good work that partners are doing and provide them with the tools to deploy in their networks, so that we can all be stronger together in this work. But really, my main thing that I've been thinking about right now is like our work's just getting started here. And so let's go do it. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And to David's point about what do we do going forward, I'll just reiterate what Craig just said. Go check out Free Society's work at their website, freesocietycoalition.org. If you want to read the declaration, /Philadelphia Declaration, and on their main website, you can find your way to the brochure as well. Just even reading that declaration and their brochure, I am 99% sure it's going to galvanize you to be more interested and engaged in these ideas, to reflect on both the past and the present and what you can do for the future of freedom, just as the original declaration galvanized a band of unruly colonists spread across the eastern seaboard to take on the mightiest empire in history. So with that, unless anyone has any closing thoughts, we'll just close out with a toast to freedom and the responsibility of keeping it worthy of celebration. Let's not just let it pass with fireworks, but with a summons to remember what was founded, understand what was imperfectly but nobly begun, and to decide what kind of citizens we must become to carry liberty forward.
Hear, hear.
Happy birthday, America.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you all for your time. Yes, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.